You know what's worse than arrogance? Arrogance with a $1 billion bank account that thinks it can purchase anything, including a judge. Picture this: a man in a custom suit that costs more than most people make in a year, standing in my courtroom, pointing his finger at me, and saying with complete confidence, "I can buy you, your courthouse, and everyone in it." That's not speculation. That's not exaggeration. Those were his exact words, spoken in front of 30 witnesses, recorded on video, preserved for posterity. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary case. This was going to be the kind of case that defines what justice really means when wealth meets accountability. It started on a Tuesday morning in September, one of those crisp fall days where Providence feels alive. The leaves were just starting to turn, that first hint of autumn color against the old brick buildings that make this city beautiful. I got to court at 8:20 a.m. like I always do. My father taught me that 40 years ago when I was just starting out. "Frank," he'd say in his thick Italian accent, adjusting his work boots before heading to the construction site, "if you're not 10 minutes early, you're late. Respect the job respects you." So there I was, early as always, sitting at my desk with a cup of Christina's coffee. Strong, black, the Italian way. The kind of coffee that actually wakes you up and reminds you why you do this work. I was reviewing my docket for the day, scanning through the usual cases. Traffic violations, small claims, minor disputes. Then I saw a name that made me pause. Marcus Wellington Pierce III. The third. You know what that Roman numeral tells you? Old money. Family legacy. The kind of wealth that gets passed down through generations, along with the belief that rules are for other people. I looked at the charges and my blood pressure started climbing even before the man walked through my door. 23 counts of reckless endangerment over 4 months. But these weren't traffic violations or public disturbance charges. These were workplace safety violations at his manufacturing company, Pierce Industries. 3 workers hospitalized, 1 permanently disabled. And here's what really got my attention. OSHA had been investigating Pierce Industries for 2 years, building cases, documenting violations. But somehow those cases kept getting dropped. Witnesses would change their statements. Evidence would go missing. Inspectors would suddenly get reassigned. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. This wasn't just negligence. This was systematic disregard for human life, backed by enough money and lawyers to make problems disappear. At least, that's what Marcus Wellington Pierce III thought. He thought his money made him untouchable. He was about to learn differently. Sitting in my courtroom gallery that morning was a man named Roberto Mendoza, 41 years old, father of 3, supporting his elderly mother on what used to be a factory worker's wages. But Roberto wasn't working anymore, couldn't work anymore. He sat there quietly, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks, his right arm in a permanent brace. That arm would never work again, never hold his daughter, never throw a ball with his son, never do the 1,000 small things we take for granted until they're taken from us. And they were taken from Roberto on a Tuesday afternoon 4 months ago when a safety guard was removed from his machine to speed up production. Marcus Wellington Pierce III had personally ordered that safety guard removed because the line was running behind quota and he'd promised the board better numbers. Roberto's medical bills were crushing him. Without workers' compensation that Pierce's lawyers were fighting, without the ability to work, with 3 kids and an elderly mother depending on him, Roberto was about to lose everything. His house was in foreclosure. His savings were gone. His wife had taken a second job, but it wasn't enough. And through all of this, Roberto Mendoza sat in my courtroom with quiet dignity, watching, waiting to see if justice would finally show up for people like him. People who did everything right, worked hard, followed the rules, and got destroyed anyway by someone who valued profit margins over human beings. Looking at Roberto, I thought about my own father. He was a construction worker here in Providence, back when the neighborhood was rough and the work was dangerous. One day, a contractor cut corners on safety equipment to save a few dollars. Scaffolding collapsed. My father fell 20 feet and broke his back. He survived, but he was never the same. Spent the rest of his life in pain because someone decided that safety protocols were too expensive, too time-consuming, too inconvenient for their profit schedule. My father always said, "Frank, a man who won't protect his workers has no honor." He said it with the authority of someone who'd been betrayed by that exact kind of man. So when I looked at Roberto Mendoza and saw that arm brace, when I read through Marcus Wellington Pierce III's file and saw 23 counts of the same contempt for worker safety that had broken my father's back, I knew something. This case wasn't about fines. This wasn't about regulatory violations or corporate policy. This was about accountability. This was about whether a man with $1 billion gets to destroy lives without consequences. This was about whether justice applies equally to the factory worker and the CEO, or whether we've created two systems, one for people like Roberto who play by the rules, and one for people like Marcus Wellington Pierce III who think the rules don't apply to them. I finished Christina's coffee, closed the file, and looked at the clock. 9:15. Court would start in 15 minutes. And Marcus Wellington Pierce III, with his billion-dollar fortune and his 4 corporate attorneys and his absolute certainty that he could buy his way out of anything, was about to walk into my courtroom. He thought this was going to be a simple proceeding. Pay a fine, make the problem go away, get back to running his empire. He had no idea that in the next hour he was going to say something so arrogant, so contemptuous of everything our justice system stands for, that it would destroy his entire life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how this unfolded. At exactly 9:30, the doors to my courtroom opened, and Marcus Wellington Pierce III made his entrance. And I do mean entrance. This wasn't a man walking into a courtroom to answer for endangering his workers. This was a CEO arriving at a board meeting he was already planning to dominate. He wore a custom Italian suit that probably cost $15,000, the kind of tailoring you can only get when money is no object. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the courtroom lights as he walked. And on his wrist, I noticed a watch that I later learned cost $50,000. $50,000. That's more than Roberto Mendoza used to make in an entire year of dangerous factory work. But it wasn't the clothes or the watch that told you everything you needed to know about Marcus Wellington Pierce III. It was the entourage. He didn't come with one lawyer, he came with 4. 4 corporate attorneys in expensive suits, carrying leather briefcases, walking in formation like a legal army. Behind them came a PR consultant, a young woman furiously typing on her tablet, probably already crafting damage control statements. And bringing up the rear was a personal assistant, a nervous-looking man carrying folders and a laptop, ready to handle whatever the great Marcus Wellington Pierce III might need. This wasn't a defendant coming to face charges. This was a billionaire who decided to grace us with his presence. The contrast in my courtroom was stunning. In the gallery sat Roberto Mendoza with his arm brace, wearing his only good suit, the one he'd worn to his daughter's confirmation and probably couldn't afford to replace. Next to him sat the widow of a worker who died in what Pierce Industries called an accident 6 months ago. She wore a simple black dress, the same one she'd worn to her husband's funeral. Behind them sat a young mother whose husband was still in physical therapy after his workplace injury, their savings gone, their future uncertain. And in the back row, an elderly couple who'd mortgaged their home to pay for their son's medical bills after he was injured at Pierce Industries. These people had all stood respectfully when I entered the courtroom, understanding that respect for the process, respect for the law, that's what separates civilization from chaos. Marcus Wellington Pierce the third? He sat down immediately, pulled out his phone, and started scrolling through emails like he was waiting for his coffee order. Didn't even look up when Christina called the courtroom to order. I watched him for a moment. This man who thought a courtroom was just another place where his money could buy him whatever outcome he wanted. He had this expression on his face. Not worry, not concern, just mild annoyance. Like this was an inconvenient appointment that was interfering with more important business. His lawyers were whispering to each other, shuffling papers, preparing their strategy. But Pierce himself? He couldn't have looked more bored if he tried. Christina's voice rang out clear and professional. Case number 74392. The People versus Marcus Wellington Pierce III. 23 counts of reckless endangerment. Workplace safety violations resulting in serious bodily harm. Pierce didn't even look up from his phone. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Let everyone in the courtroom see this man's contempt for the proceedings. Then I spoke. Mr. Pierce, please approach the bench. He sighed. Actually sighed, like I'd asked him to do something unreasonably tedious. He stood up slowly, still looking at his phone, scrolling through whatever email or stock report was apparently more important than the people whose lives he'd destroyed. He walked to the bench with that same casual arrogance, still holding his phone. Mr. Pierce, I said, keeping my voice level, please put your phone away and show respect for these proceedings. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw it in his eyes, the calculation, the assessment. He was sizing me up, deciding how much respect he needed to pretend to show, figuring out the minimum performance required to get through this inconvenience. Judge, he said, his voice smooth and practiced, I'm running a $3 billion company. Every minute I'm here costs my shareholders money. Can we expedite this? Can we expedite this? Like justice was a fast food order, and he was asking if we could supersize it and get him out the door faster. I opened the file in front of me, took my time, let him stand there and wait. Mr. Pierce, I began, you're facing 23 counts of reckless endangerment. Your company, Pierce Industries, systematically removed safety equipment from manufacturing lines to increase production speed. 3 workers were hospitalized. 1 man lost the use of his arm permanently. How do you plead? His lead attorney, a slick-looking man named Richard Hartwell, started to speak, but Pierce put his hand up, silencing his own lawyer. The arrogance was breathtaking. Judge, Pierce said, his voice taking on this patronizing tone like he was explaining something to a child. With all due respect, you don't understand manufacturing. Safety protocols slow production. Sometimes calculated risks are necessary for competitiveness in a global market. Calculated risks. He just called permanently disabling Roberto Mendoza a calculated risk. I saw Roberto's hand tighten on his arm brace, saw the widow's face go pale, saw the elderly couple lean forward in shock. This man was standing in a courtroom, facing criminal charges, and he was defending the decision to remove safety equipment. He was actually defending it. Mr. Pierce, I said, my voice getting colder, a man lost the use of his arm because you removed a safety guard to save 30 seconds per unit produced. Roberto Mendoza, a father of 3, will never hold his daughter again, never throw a ball with his son, never button his own shirt. That's not a calculated risk. That's calculated cruelty. Pierce shrugged. Actually shrugged. Unfortunate accident, Judge. That's what workers' compensation insurance is for. We followed all legal requirements for reporting the injury. We've been cooperating with investigators. This is really a regulatory matter that should be handled administratively, not criminally. His lawyers were nodding along, like this was a perfectly reasonable defense. Like destroying a man's arm was just paperwork, just administrative process, just the cost of doing business in manufacturing. I could feel my blood pressure rising. that familiar heat in my chest when you encounter something so fundamentally wrong that your body reacts before your mind fully processes it. I looked past Pierce to the gallery, to the widow sitting there with her hands folded in her lap. "Mrs. Chen," I said, addressing her directly, "your husband died in an incident at Pierce Industries 6 months ago. Is that correct?" She stood up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor. The investigation concluded it was an equipment failure, but 3 witnesses who saw what happened changed their statements after speaking with company lawyers." Pierce's expression didn't change, didn't even flicker. "Judge," he said, interrupting before I could continue, "people's memories can be unreliable under stress. Our legal team simply helped witnesses recall events more accurately. That's standard procedure in any corporate incident investigation. Help them recall more accurately." This man was admitting to witness tampering in open court and calling it standard procedure. His lawyers looked uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats, probably realizing their client was making statements that could bury him. But Pierce was so confident, so certain that his money would shield him from consequences, that he couldn't see the hole he was digging. "Mr. Pierce," I said, "you're telling this court that you provided legal guidance to witnesses in a death investigation." He smiled, actually smiled. "Judge, I'm telling you that we have excellent legal counsel, who ensure that all statements are thorough and accurate. Is there something wrong with accuracy?" The courtroom was dead silent. You could feel the tension, the collective understanding that something unprecedented was happening. This wasn't a defendant trying to minimize his responsibility or negotiate a lesser charge. This was a billionaire announcing to everyone present that he'd bought and paid for his version of reality, and he expected us all to accept it. I thought about my father in that moment, thought about how he'd worked his entire life with honor and dignity, never cutting corners, never putting profit above people. And here was Marcus Wellington Pierce III, standing in my courtroom, defending the exact kind of corner cutting that had broken my father's back and destroyed Roberto Mendoza's arm. "Mr. Pierce," I said, standing up from my bench, something I rarely do, "you seem to believe that your wealth entitles you to a different standard of justice." His smile didn't waver. "Not a different standard, Your Honor, just the standard that exists in reality. My company employs 15,000 people. We contribute $200 million annually to this state's economy. I have senators on speed dial. The governor attended my wedding last year. These are just facts. And the fact is, this proceeding, while I'm sure it's important to you, is really just a minor regulatory issue that's taking up valuable time I could spend creating jobs and generating economic growth." That's when I knew. This man wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. Because he genuinely believed that his economic power placed him above accountability. And he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. "Mr. Pierce," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "I think we need to hear directly from the people affected by your calculated risks. Roberto Mendoza, please approach the bench." Roberto stood slowly, carefully, his right arm hanging useless in its brace. He walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, the kind of dignity that comes from a lifetime of honest work. Pierce barely glanced at him, already looking back at his phone. "Mr. Mendoza," I said gently, "please tell the court what happened on the day you were injured." Roberto's voice was steady, but you could hear the pain underneath. "It was a Tuesday afternoon, Your Honor, around 2 o'clock. Mr. Pierce himself came down to the production floor that day. He walked the line with the production manager, pointing at different stations, talking about quota numbers. When he got to my station, he stopped. I was running the metal press, the one that stamps automotive parts. He looked at the safety guard, the clear shield that protects your hands from the press, and he asked the manager how much time we lost per cycle because of it. "What did the manager say?" I asked. "He said about 30 seconds per part. The guard has to be in place before the press activates. It's automatic, a safety feature." Mr. Pierce did some math on his phone, right there in front of us. Then he said, 30 seconds times 2,000 parts per day times 5 days a week. That's over 80 hours of lost production. Disable the guards. Roberto's voice cracked slightly. I told him it wasn't safe. I said the guards were there for a reason, that OSHA required them. Mr. Pierce looked at me like I was stupid. He said, "Do you want a job or not?" I removed my glasses and cleaned them slowly, thinking about what I was about to do. In 40 years on this bench, I'd seen arrogance before. I'd seen wealthy defendants who thought their money made them special. But I'd never seen someone openly state that they could purchase a judge, purchase justice itself, and expect to walk out of the courtroom without consequences. Marcus Wellington Pierce III stood there with that same confident smirk, absolutely certain that his billions would protect him from accountability. He was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. "Mr. Pierce," I said, my voice cold and steady, "you just made the worst mistake of your entire life." His smirk didn't fade. "I doubt that, Your Honor. In business, you learn to assess risks and opportunities. I'm simply being honest about the reality of our legal system." "Honest," I repeated. "You call attempting to bribe a sitting judge honesty?" His lead attorney, Richard Hartwell, jumped up. "Your Honor, my client was speaking rhetorically, making a philosophical point about economic influence in society. He wasn't making an actual offer of bribery." I looked at Hartwell directly. "Counselor, your client stated, and I quote, 'I can buy you.' Those aren't philosophical musings. That's attempted corruption of a judicial officer." I picked up my desk phone. "Christina, please call the FBI field office in Providence. Tell them we have an attempted bribery of a federal official in progress. Also call the State Attorney General's office. I'm referring charges of witness tampering, judicial intimidation, and corruption." For the first time, Pierce's smile vanished. "Wait, what? What are you doing?" "I'm doing my job, Mr. Pierce. You attempted to bribe me in open court with 30 witnesses present. You admitted to providing legal guidance to witnesses in a death investigation, which sounds remarkably like witness tampering. And you've demonstrated a pattern of behavior that suggests systematic criminal activity." "Your Honor," Hartwell said, his voice rising with panic, "my client was simply making an economic observation. He wasn't literally offering you money." "I didn't say he was," I replied. "But he stated he could buy me. That reveals his intent, his state of mind, his fundamental belief that judges are purchasable. And that statement, combined with his admission of witness tampering and his pattern of safety violations resulting in death and serious injury, paints a picture of someone who believes the legal system is just another commodity he can acquire." Within 5 minutes, Detective Sarah Chen from the State Police walked into my courtroom. "Your Honor, you called about judicial bribery?" "Yes, Detective. Mr. Pierce here informed me he could buy this courthouse, and suggested everyone has a price. I'm referring the matter to you for investigation and potential prosecution." Detective Chen looked at Pierce with professional assessment. "Mr. Pierce, is this true? Did you tell Judge Caprio you could buy him?" Pierce's face had gone from confident to pale. "I didn't mean it literally. I was making a point about economic influence." Detective Chen pulled out her notepad. "So you did say those words?" Pierce looked at his lawyers desperately, but they were frantically whispering among themselves, clearly not prepared for their client to self-destruct so spectacularly in open court. The courtroom slowly emptied, people still processing what they'd just witnessed. Christina approached my bench, her face showing the shock we all felt. "Judge, in 25 years working in this courthouse, I have never seen anything like that." "Neither have I, Christina," I said quietly. "Neither have I." Roberto Mendoza walked up slowly, his arm still in its brace. "Your Honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you. Not for the money, though God knows we need it, but for seeing us, for treating us like we mattered. Mr. Mendoza, you always mattered. Mr. Pierce just forgot that people aren't line items on a spreadsheet." Within hours, The story exploded across every news outlet in the country. Billionaire CEO arrested after telling judge, "I can buy you." The recording of Pierce's words went viral instantly. His own voice dripping with arrogance, declaring that everyone has a price, that he could purchase the courthouse itself. Pierce Industries stock dropped 40% in a single trading day as investors panicked. The board of directors called an emergency meeting that same evening. By midnight, they'd voted unanimously to remove Marcus Wellington Pierce III as CEO, effective immediately.